Hello, I'm Andria Zaia, President and CEO at the National Museum of Industrial History. The Bethlehem Steel Corporation, its shipyards, subsidiary companies, and plants have always played a major role in the defense of our nation. In the 1880s, Bethlehem Iron began supplying armor plate and forgings to the U.S. Armed Forces, establishing a partnership that would span generations. And by World War II, Bethlehem Steel Chairman Eugene Grace made a promise to President Roosevelt that would change the world. Grace pledged that the Bethlehem yards would deliver a ship a day to support the war effort. In only 4 years, they produced almost 1,200 ships in shipyards located along the east and west coasts. It was a commitment backed by skill, determination, and the patriotic spirit of hundreds of thousands of American workers who understood that freedom hung in the balance. They served their country to keep the world free. Here in the Bethlehem plant, ordinary men and women answered extraordinary calls to service. Some served in the military before joining the workforce. Others left their jobs to serve overseas and then returned to Bethlehem Steel to continue building America's industrial strength. Each of them brought unique experiences and an unwavering dedication to both their craft and their country. In this project, we honor 6 remarkable individuals whose stories represent the thousands of veterans who called Bethlehem Steel home. Their legacy lives on in every beam, in every forging, and in every ship that sailed to victory. They are the Veterans of Steel.
Tom Cedor. I started at Bethlehem Steel in 1964, March. Originally I was born and raised in Fountain Hill, Pennsylvania, and then my father was killed in the blast furnace, and I was then raised by my grandfather, who lived in East Allentown. So when I was 9 or so, or 10, I moved to East Allentown. I went to school there at St. Ursula's, then Our Lady Help of Christians, and Central Catholic, and finished up at Allen High School. The history starts, I'm a third-generation steelworker on my mother's side and my father's side. And my mother's side, he was an organizer and an apprentice like I was. I have a diploma from 1902, signed by Eugene Grace, that he was a machinist, and he was also a union organizer. I got an apprenticeship. So having an apprenticeship to me was very important, furthering my education. And so that's why I chose Bethlehem Steel, because I had the apprenticeship. I probably maybe would have went somewhere else if I wouldn't have got that apprenticeship, but that was important to me. Shop electrician A, we learned how, we had 2 years of motor rewinding, which I didn't particularly care for. I went to regular electrician. That was 2 job classes higher. But it was sort of a monotonous kind of job. I'd rather have the electrician, and building control panels and controllers and taking motors apart, lifting magnets, cable reels.
John Lindenmuth. I was born in Allentown. I lived there for 6 years. Then we moved to Bethlehem in the Westgate area. I went to Bethlehem Tech in drafting and civil technology. On Monday, I went to Bethlehem Steel and took the test, and I was hired that day. 1965 to 1997. 3 or 4 months that I was an oiler, and then they made me a helper. An oiler was class 4, and the helper was 6. I became a millwright A, the youngest millwright A in the shop.
My name is Charles Walt, and I grew up in Catasauqua, South Catasauqua, and I went to Catasauqua High School, graduated in '64. They were hiring a lot of guys at the time in '64. So when I got here, a lot of the jobs were taken up, and I ended up having to start in the labor gang. They posted for rigger helpers, and I put in for it, and I got the job with the riggers, and that's when I started with them. And I don't know, I might have been in labor gang 6 months, and I started in the rigger department in '65. 33 and a half years, up until the end, yeah.
My name's Donald J. Trexler. I grew up in Allentown in the 6th Ward near New Eilers Brewery. I started here July 6, 1964, and I worked till the middle of May '97. I don't know the exact date. When I did get a job at Bethlehem Steel, still living at home, still living with my grandparents, I brought my first paycheck home, and I showed it to my grandfather. And he sat at the kitchen table, tears running down his cheek. Tears of joy, because I got a job at Bethlehem Steel. I started in shipping yard maintenance, and I worked there 33 years. 2 of them I was in the service. But I can honestly say, in my 33 years in that particular department, we took pride in being able to fix anything and try and fix it as fast as we could and the best we could.
My name is Thomas Gramuga. I grew up at 641 Delwood Street in Bethlehem. My dad worked at the steel. My uncles worked at the steel. My grandfather worked at the steel. I have cousins that worked at the steel. Yeah, that's about it. I graduated from Liberty High School in 1966. What happened was I was into tech, the VOTech. So I took machine shop in high school. And about 2 months before graduation, I went down to the steel to take aptitude tests and tests to get into Bethlehem Steel. And before I graduated, I had a job at the steel. Well, I started out as a laborer. Then I was a machine operator for a while. Then an apprenticeship opened up, and I put in for the apprenticeship. And I got the apprenticeship, and that's a 4-year course.
My name is Steve Jones, and I grew up in the Slate Belt in Bangor, Pennsylvania. I started at Bethlehem Steel in July of 1972. It was interesting how I got there, because one of our best friends was the secretary of a general manager. She was aware I was looking for a job, and she mentioned me there, they had 2 positions open for a technician. I got an interview with the 2 engineers that had each of the positions, and they came back and offered me both. And I thought the one that I took was more interesting. And that was, for those familiar with Bethlehem Steel, that was in G building, which was right behind the gate. Then proceeded to spend the next 15 years or so in doing work on corrosion and coatings of steel and other things like that. Well, in the meantime, I had started going to Lafayette night school, and I eventually came out of there as a mechanical engineer. I had to do something to change things around, and that was coordinating projects at Homer Labs with different groups, depending on what products were involved, and sitting in on project reviews with them. But it's also being a liaison to customers. The guy, when he was describing the job to me, he said to me, and I always followed that advice, even through the rest of my career, I followed that advice. He said, sometime you're going to be the only Bethlehem person our customer has seen since something has happened. Remember, it's not your fault. And number 2, tell them what you can honestly do, and then go do it.
Over the many years, the Bethlehem plant employees have certainly played a key role in the defense of our nation. Not only by producing the vast amounts of arms and steel for America's defense needs, but also by making personal sacrifices, and often the ultimate sacrifice, through service in our country's armed services.
My military was from 1959 to 1963. I enlisted because I figured I'm going to get it over with so I wouldn't get drafted. I didn't want to be in the Army. I wanted to be in the Navy. I joined the Navy. I didn't want to sleep on the ground, but I ended up sleeping 6 high. So I joined the Navy, a regular enlistment. I was a reserve, and then I would have had to wait to go active duty, and I thought, the heck with it. I went regular enlistment in the Navy. I tried to get into refrigeration. Refrigeration interested me, and I studied engineman book, all about diesel engines, and it was a part of the refrigeration aboard a refrigerated cargo ship. I had to stand duty in the engine room itself, so I worked in the engine room, which was an open engine room. The boilers were right there. It was an old ship, World War II ship. Hot, dirty, noisy. USS Allsteed, they were named after stars. And the number 3 hold was frozen foods, and we had the keys to it, so I ate very good. Then we would go into Valencia, Spain. I was in Valencia, Spain 10 different times, so I knew Valencia like I knew my hometown. And we'd get the oranges, potatoes, and fruits in the 4 and 5 holes, and then we'd go out and supply the ship in the Mediterranean. All but one time I was lucky enough to go to the North Atlantic. It was more of a goodwill tour, Rotterdam, Holland. That was my favorite cruise. When I got interviewed, Johnny Free was our foreman. I worked on these big pump motors, and when I told him, I worked on those kind of motors, that opened his eyes up. I think that was very instrumental in me getting a job as an apprentice. It did help me get a job in the Navy. That was one of the good things. It wasn't an easy full enlistment, but the end result was good. I actually ended up for a time rebuilding all the generators and starters from the shop. That wasn't part of the apprenticeship, but the apprenticeship was, one day we went to school. We had to buy our own books. We had to buy our own tools. I remember, never forget, I think it was $2.38 an hour. for what my salary was. They took money out of our paycheck. And ironically, during World War II, those GI Bill guys, as you were an apprentice, they paid you some money. And I fought and fought and fought with the veterans and so forth that why aren't we getting it? Vietnam era vets and so forth. And the day that I finished my apprenticeship, the next group of apprentices, they got $200 a month to help.
I was drafted, and they were very nice to me. All my co-workers were very nice. We were a family. Most of them were veterans, because in those days everybody was in World War II. But they gave me gifts when I went away. They gave me shoe shine kit, and I forget what all they gave me, but stuff that I could use in the service. I was in the Army, and I ended up in aviation was my MOS. In the I signed up in airborne, but they didn't send me airborne. They sent me to aviation school, where it became a fixed wing, was airplanes mechanic, and then if you graduated that, they sent you to what they called rotary wings, which is helicopters. I was crew chief on Huey gunships. I worked on when they're on the ground. When we're in the yard, we were door gunners. So I was lucky I didn't have to walk through the jungle. I just had a job to do and did it. Our first order that I always remember, your order is to support the ground commander. And that's who we took our orders from, because they needed us more than we needed them. Well, I'll put it this way. Every day when I walked out to the flight line, I said a prayer. Let me get through this one, and I'll worry about tomorrow, the next day. And it worked out. The only thing that kept me going, that my wife, every day she wrote me a letter. She wasn't my wife though. She was my girlfriend at that time.
Well, I started in October 5th, and I'd say a year and 2 months, and I was drafted in December. Man, you didn't do any. I don't remember what, transpired. I knew that through the union that we kept our seniority. That I knew. I actually signed up for an extra year to get a job. Like, I got in the combat engineers, operating engineer. I operated heavy equipment for the 3 years that I was in. And that's basically when I went in. I ended up in Germany for 32 months. And that's where I spent all my time, really. I had orders for Vietnam. And they would fall out so many guys, and they needed to allocate these guys wherever they wanted to send them after school. Well, they sent the first group, and the second group I was in, because my name is W, I'm always at the end of the line. Our half was going to Vietnam. So I didn't know what to think. What am I going to do? I didn't know anything about what was going on over there, really. I wasn't paying attention at the time. When you get drafted, you don't even think about that you're ever going to be drafted and that it is a war, And then what happened was, it was like 4 hours later, we reassembled again, and they changed my orders. Now the first group was going to Korea, and I was going to Germany. I'm thinking, how quick could that change? And I was kind of happy after I, not then at the time, but later years, when I seen what had gone on in Vietnam, I was very happy that I didn't have to go. And I mean, the guys that served, they went through hell, I think.
I was drafted. I had already, like I said, I started here in July of '64. I got drafted October of '65. And actually, at 19, I was already older than most of the draftees. I was like fortunate. I went to basic training. We were starting to get our, what they call an MOS, what your job would be. And I went to radio school and later to radio teletype school. So I was a radio operator, radio teletype operator, served with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade in Vietnam. And my mother was rather upset when I was so happy I'm going to radio school and not just going to advanced infantry. I'm at least going to learn something. But she read an article somewhere that said the average lifespan of a radio operator in Vietnam was 4 months. So she was deeply distressed that I was going to be a radio operator. I said, pray to God every day, let me live to go home. Let me marry my girlfriend at that time, now my wife, for over 53 years. And if I go back to Bethlehem Steel, which I did, I don't care if I work days, middles, nights, holidays, weekends. I'll just be so happy to be home. What made it easy for me was coming back to your friends and having so many fellow employees that had served and understood what it was like to be in the service.
The first 2 years of my apprenticeship were good. At the end of my second year, or around there, I got drafted. I went in there, and you were supposed to have a deferment if you were an apprentice. And it ended up, I didn't have a deferment. So I had to go. Well, there were a lot of vets that had worked in there from World War II, my dad included, and 3 of my uncles. They all served. So there were always stories to be told, and they told stories. And even the guys, when I went into work, they had their stories about being in the service or being wherever they were. So that actually helped a little bit for being drafted, because I had an idea of what's going to happen. And I kind of figured out that I was going to be probably infantry anyway. They asked me what I wanted to do in the service. And they had a board there, and they said, you can do any of these jobs. And I looked at the board, and there was machinist up there. So I was a machinist, or apprentice already. I said, I'd like to be a machinist. And the guy said, well, you just sign up for another 2 years, and we'll get you to be a machinist. I said, well, I'm not signing up for 2 more years. You can put me where you need me. And that's what they did. And I went to mortar school. I learned how to fire and operate a mortar, the fire direction and forward observer. And then at the end of that course, they came to me and they asked me if I'd be interested in going to NCO school. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, I have 2 years I have to put in. If I can figure out enough things to do in that 2 years going to school, I'm going to take it. And when you finish NCO school, then you come out as a buck sergeant or an E5. So I went from a private to an E5 in 16 weeks. 2 weeks before I left for Vietnam, I got married. We basically would ride in on helicopters, and they would give us an area to search. We did what was called search and destroy. So they would fly us into an LZ, we'd get out of the helicopters, and we had a pattern that we would search. Well, while we were doing this, we got into a firefight. We got basically ambushed by NVA. And we were getting in a lot of heavy fire from them, and a RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, hit a tree above me, and I have shrapnel in my back from that. That was the first injury. The second injury, we were We were on a patrol, and we held up because the point squad had seen something. So we were held up, and the point squad and the first squad, they set up a hasty ambush. And what it was another patrol of NVA were coming through. And when they came through, they opened up on that patrol. When they opened up on that patrol, the rest of the company came up to help them. And we were going through searching to see if we could find anybody, and we found some blood on the ground. And we figured, well, there was somebody wounded. So my squad, we did the trail, we followed the blood trail. And just as we were coming up on a little ridge, there was a guy next to me. He says, "There's an NVA up in front of me." And I said to him, "Well, shoot." It was a new guy. I said, "Shoot." Well, when I said shoot, I saw a hand grenade coming up through the air. And it went off midair. And the scar on my chin is from that. It was only 2 weeks before I came home. And my daughter was born in August. So it could have been September. So I put my 2 years in this service. When I came back, I went back to the steel. I think it was probably only about a week or two after I got out of the service. I went back to the steel. But for the most part, I didn't talk about it. Uh-huh. You know, I came home, I was married, I had a child. That was the important thing. A couple of years back, I decided that while I was in Vietnam, there were 13 guys that were killed in my company. I want to go visit their graves. Because we never really got a chance to see them. Because usually what would happen, if somebody was wounded, they were medevaced out of there, and that was probably the last you saw of them. So they would be there, helicoptered out, and you really never got the full story of what happened. Now, most of the time we'd find out whether they were a KIA or just wounded. You know, or they were going back to the States, or, you know, they were KIA. So I made a sort of a promise to visit their grave sites. I managed to get to 10.
I initially started out at Moravian College after I got out of high school, and spent a year there, and was asked to leave, and then knocked around for a little bit, and then I got my draft notice to go into the Army, which I did in May of '68. So I went through Fort Bragg for basic training, then was assigned to Fort Sill in Oklahoma for artillery training. What they call it advanced infantry training, but AIT, but in that instance it was artillery. And after that I had to leave and went to Vietnam. The overall umbrella was the 23rd Artillery Field Force. Our particular unit was the 13th Artillery Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Sea Battery. I had gotten married during leave in 1968, and I think it was about a month after I got my extension in Vietnam, I managed to get caught with an RPG round and get a Purple Heart. And I was sitting on the ground with my knees up, my back up against the sandbag wall, and this round landed right in front of me, and it hit all my lower right leg, but the concussion all went into my crotch. I thought, oh no. And it turned out that worked out all right. Spent some time in a hospital, which was fun. That was in Bungtown, which is kind of a resort area on the ocean. And I was there. There were a couple of guys in our unit that were hurt, and we didn't have rank or anything. And the one guy was a captain, and he would wheel me around in the wheelchair when I was ambulatory. He'd take me into the officers club there, and they didn't know. When I left Vietnam, I was a Specialist 4, which is a non-command equivalent of a corporal. You have no command responsibility. There was a big processing center out in Oakland, California at the time. Everybody coming back usually went through there before they got reassigned or let go. I left everything on the floor there except the clothes they gave me to wear home. I went through San Francisco Airport. Was called a baby killer. Was called this or that. I was spit on. I said, wait a minute, I'm on your side. And one of the first things, it had been new, I think, that year in '69. I got back in December of '69, and I think it was near there or shortly after that, Vietnam Veterans Against the War was formed, and I joined them. I didn't have any ill effects from things that had happened over there, and things did happen. But I think that's because I talked to anybody that was listening. And I went to this, I think it was a Christmas party in the apartment I was living in, and there were like early January 1970, something like that. And people got me in the corner in the kitchen and just kept firing questions at me. And I just talked and talked and talked. And I think that got a lot of it out of me, a lot of the stress and wear and tear of that out of me. Maybe that's where I got it, is humor. I mean, you can't do anything about it. So you find, sounds corny, but you find your joy wherever you can.
What you see was conceived, designed, and constructed by American steelworkers, inspired by our nation's proud military traditions and the loyalty and the service of its many, many veterans. This, then, is not just a memorial to Bethlehem plant veterans. Its significance extends far beyond our plant gates. It's the highest tribute that could be paid to veterans because it was built and the idea came from veterans.
Many of our employees were veterans and served in all types of situations, in all the conflicts, and in between. A meeting occurred in this BPO building where managers and the union officers were going to sit together and listen to Dwight Edwards, who was on that time the President's Vietnam Veteran Outreach Committee, to tell us about things that are here in our plant that could adversely affect especially combat veterans. Loud banging noises, sparks, the smell of sulfur. And now this is 1988, and I'm sitting in that, I wasn't invited except that Vince Opie brought me with him. He said, you were in Vietnam, come on along, we're gonna hear this guy talk. And he talked and he moved everybody in that room. His father was a preacher in Philadelphia. He grew up in Philadelphia. He was a combat vet in Vietnam. And I realized now, this is 11 years after I came back, and I never gave Vietnam much thought that whole time. Oh, I would pick up the paper if there was something about the 199th Light Infantry. I'd read it because that was my unit. At the end of that meeting, Dwight Edwards says, "Are there any questions?" And nobody raised their hand. It was close to lunchtime. But I was all the way in the back with Paul Cochise, and I put my hand up. Yes, I said who I was. I said I was an Army veteran, served in Vietnam. And what he just said moved me so much. I realized that I was happy to be home, but I sort of forgot those that I left behind. And I said, in this room are gathered all the people that can do something about this. And I hope you take action. And that was the end, no more questions. Gus Moffett got up, he walked to the back, he said, "In your name," I told him. "Who's your local union president?" I said, "Chico Kersey." He said, "Chico, I want him on the committee." And that committee was being formed right at that instant. He told Paul Cochise, "Get it started." I was so happy to be back here that I just sort of forgot the ones that we left behind. And I think this memorial that we constructed in our department was something to say thank you to everyone who served. And as we went to departments to have things done for this, and Ray Rosati's vision of it was bigger than anybody on that committee could first realize, we did ask for a placard and we put a memorial out there.
This project was not done by one person. It was done by many people, and I'd like to give recognition to the committee. But one thing I do want to recognize is it was a cooperation between management and union. Without the cooperation there, this project could have never gotten off the ground. But every time we went into a department with a piece of one of those pieces, and we'd have a man, I'd walk up to him, I'd say, "We got to have this sandblasted right away." I'd say, "No problem, I'll do it during my lunch hour or my lunch break. I'll forget my coffee break."
I often say about our memorial, we put that lettering to be specific to the men and women who served in the armed forces of the United States of America on top. And although it was 4 main panels, we always felt it's for every veteran. Like I said, Ray had this idea that we didn't exactly understand how big the scope was he was talking about. But when we finally said, okay, it's going to be World War I, World War II, Korea and Vietnam panels, what can we put on them? So we would start kicking ideas around. Now, Paul Cochise is the first one that says there's got to be a woman on that memorial somewhere. So the World War I nurse seemed to work out the best. We would throw out ideas of how about definitely Vietnam had to have a helicopter.
Because that helicopter was supposed to be my helicopter, because she wanted a picture of it, so I brought my book and I showed him.
And Howard Bryce would show us the pictures he drew, and we, as a committee, said, well, we voted on it. Well, so we put a helicopter on there, and we put the one that's down in Washington where they're helping a wounded buddy out of the jungle. Ray Rosati decided how he would space it and where he would put it. But you look on the ends, on the right-hand side on World War I panel, there's a doughboy helmet and a rifle standing up, and it's cut out to fit the rifle. On the left-hand side of the memorial on the Vietnam panel, it's supposed to be the country of North and South Vietnam. And there's one on the Korean panel. We had trouble thinking what should we put on Korea, so we put 3 flags: the United States, Korea, and the United Nations.
Raymond came into Central Tool one day and he said, I think it was an American flag, the American flag that's up in the corner. He came in there and he said he wanted to have stars made to put on that flag. So he talked to another friend of mine, Eddie Sterner. And he was talking to Eddie Sterner and I, and he said, you know, can we make, you know, stars to go on that memorial? And we hashed it out and we talked about it, and we actually came up with a design to make the stars. So I did the milling work and Eddie did the lathe work.
Rich McLaughlin took to that with so much vigor and so much self-gratification. The day we dedicated it, I looked at these photos and I see Rich McLaughlin with a suit and a tie and looking dapper. And I think, I know, for this was like healing. Some horror stories to tell if you wanted to sit down here, the true stories. He was assigned to the Korean, the Rock Marines. And I know it helped him. So I think it was a win-win.
You all should note, too, that right in the middle and the top is a special space on this memorial dedicated to the Americans who never returned from Korea and from Vietnam. Our MIA, our missing in action people. God willing, someday they may all be home with us.